I'm Terry Meyer. I'm here at USB Ed talking about my new book, which is called Strategy, Leadership and Change. And really that's about pulling together those three threads: determining the organization's strategy, what needs to change within the organization, and what is the role of leadership in pulling all of that together and making sure that it is delivered. There are lots of books on strategy, and most of them I couldn't understand. So they're quite complicated. And there's lots of books on leadership and there's lots of books on change. And for me, it's really important that these things connect. One of the things I want to say right at the start is that there are many right ways of doing this. There are many right ways of doing strategy. Each consultant, most consultants have their own particular way of facilitating strategy. And most of them work. Now, there are also some wrong ways, obviously. But there are many different ways of doing this stuff. And I always say to people when we talk on this kind of subject, you know, whatever I say, you will find examples where the opposite is equally true, and it's worked. So there's no one right answer in this field. And the same applies to leadership, the same applies to change. There are many different ways of getting to wherever it is you want to go. You know, if a business goes through a strategy process and sees, particularly in a fast-changing environment, the world is changing, strategies have to change. So we can't talk about strategy without talking about change, because that's what's happening. By the same token, you can't talk about change management without direction, and unless it's directly related to the strategy of the organization. And you can't really talk about leadership without talking about the context in which leadership happens, which is really the strategic positioning of the organization. And leadership, again, in this environment in which we operate, is all about taking people down the journey, whatever that might be, which also suggests change and transformation, because really in this day and age, sort of maintenance leadership is not exactly sustainable over a period of time. What we need is transformational leadership. So leadership and change are really two sides of a triangular coin, or three sides of a triangular coin, if we can put it that way. So for me, it was really quite important that we connected these things, because often in business schools and so on, you know, we have the subject strategy and we have a subject change and we have a subject called leadership, and maybe they don't just connect. The book is divided into three, which is strategy, leadership, and change. But as a precursor to that, it was quite important to talk about the kinds of problems that organizations have to deal with. So the first part of it is really about solving problems in a complex world. You may have come across this framework. It sort of helped explain things for me by Dave Snowden about the kinds of problems that we have in organizations. On the one hand, we have what they call complicated problems and really sort of complex problems. Just some of the characteristics of organizations. If we see an organization as an organizational system. Now, there are many different kinds of systems. There are IT systems and engineering systems, the hard systems approach to things, and there are the, if you like, the other side of it where it's very esoteric and, you know, everything is connected and we're all one living being. But somewhere in between that we have what, for want of a better word, we can talk about organizational systems. And some of the issues around that is, firstly, with organizational systems, we need to understand the interconnectedness of different parts of the organization. The whole question of emergence, and more organizations are expecting that the solutions to the problem will emerge from the organization. The whole issue of multiple causality. In complex problems, there's seldom one cause. Where we have an organization or a subsidiary in an organization that is not performing effectively, it's seldom one cause. So what we've got to do is we've got to find ways that we can understand what are all the issues and how can we deal with the primary systemic kinds of issues and redesign the organization so that the symptoms of the problem disappear. And then there's a notion of self-organization. Now, the fact is that actually if you put people together and you've got sort of common purpose and a bit of facilitating, you can actually get whatever's important is actually going to emerge. It's important to see an organization holistically. So the culture, the leadership, what the external environment is, what is the strategy for organizational effectiveness, the strategy, the metrics, whatever, the key processes, is the technology right, are the structures right, do we have the right people, and is the whole thing pulled together. But whatever the business needs to address, we need to look at positioning all of those things so that they're all working to the common good. So strategy really simply, it's about determining what game the organization is going to play in, where it's not going to play, and sometimes that's as difficult a decision as deciding where it's going to play, and then deciding what needs to be done to win in playing that game, to win the game. And that really, quite simply, is what I guess strategy is all about. The process to do corporate strategy will probably be quite different to operational strategy. So strategy at a corporate level is really an investment strategy. Where are you going to take your capital and where are you going to get the best return, or the appropriate return? Whereas at operations level, it's much more about obviously the operations and how you're going to position that particular type of business in the marketplace. I think it's quite often one sees strategies and one facilitates strategy session where there's a mix of positioning the organization in the external environment, the markets, and whatever, and also including building organizational capability. And I think just conceptually at least, we need to separate those things out. The time horizon, the strategy workshop that one goes away to for 3 days or whatever it is actually just a snapshot in time, because you need to take a snapshot in time. But actually it's the culmination of a rolling conversation. So most of the things that come up at a strategy session, one would hope, are not something brand new and wow and so on. It actually should be the culmination of a rolling conversation. Okay, if we look at formulating strategy, probably the most important thing and the most interesting thing in USB is really quite in the forefront of this, is looking at the future. So how do we deal with the future? It's the world view of management and the executive in particular that will or will not see the signals in the environment that can have a profound effect on your organization. One of the most important roles of a facilitator of strategy is to help an organization look at alternative realities. Then positioning the organization really is saying what products you're going to be in, what services perhaps you're going to deliver. The identity of the organization is the vision, the mission, the values of the organization. And then ultimately, at the end of the day, the whole purpose of this exercise is to say, what are we going to spend our time and resources? Where are we going to focus these things? And so we come up with a series of areas that we're going to focus on for this year or 2 years or whatever the case might be. Okay, why do strategies fail? And this is really to some extent it's the implementation side of things. So it's issues of participation. Who's going to participate in the formulation of the strategy? Do we have the right people? Organizational capability is critically important. We have the strategy, yes, we want to take what we're doing here and we want to expand into other parts of Africa, and suddenly we find that really that's not just taking what you do here and replicating it there. There's a whole lot of other things associated with doing that. Obviously, communicating strategy throughout the organization. People need to engage with the strategy. So we've got a new strategy now. We all know Exco went away for 3 days and they came back with this wow strategy. So what does it mean for me tomorrow? Leadership energy. There needs to be change strategy, assuming that the strategy changes. There needs to be a way of making sure it happens. How much of the time is spent on operational day-to-day issues and how much time is spent on the strategic thinking? Okay, lack of monitoring, it goes without saying it has to be monitored. And again, if we're so busy focusing on the short term, it's quite difficult now to change lenses and start looking into the distance. Organizational design, for the most part, is about creating balances in the organization. And that's really the job of the CEO. One needs to look at it outside of just one's own organization. The whole issue around insourcing and outsourcing, there was a phase where everything was, you could go and outsource everything. The whole issue of centralized versus decentralized, and there's no right or wrong models. The Bidvests of this world and so on are very decentralized with relatively little corporate control and corporate support functions. Are people working at the right level? If you have the wrong people in the organization, very often the level of work is pushed down, and senior people are involved in operational kinds of stuff. Very importantly, optimizing the present versus creating the future. You have cash cows in organizations, and they provide the money and for the profits and so on, but who's sitting and looking at the future, and who's creating new organizations for the future? Okay, transformational leadership. It's about making a difference. I always say to people in leadership positions, you know, when you leave this organization in 2 years' time, what will be different as a consequence of your being here? And what are you going to be remembered for? The other thing that for me is really important, we talk a lot about leadership characteristics and what makes a good leader and whatever. We don't spend anywhere near enough time talking about what does the leader stand for. And then, of course, there's branding. You know, you can't be a leader without branding. So, you know, you have a leadership brand. I think in modern organizations, teams are important, obviously, but it's more about collaboration. And it's more about understanding that as a leader, you have multiple stakeholders to whom you need to provide leadership. Building tomorrow's leaders, we could certainly spend a great deal of time on that. But really, we need to understand what the future challenges are. We then need to identify future leaders. It's a very instructive question to ask ExCos. In 2017 or 2020, what is this leadership team going to look like? And then we've got to say, okay, so if you're not necessarily the people to take it into the future, where are the people now who are going to take it into the future? Do we have them in the pipeline? Have we identified them? And are they available to the organization as it moves forward? Overwhelmingly in these top global companies, the shift is from classroom training to on-the-job learning. It's about creating a leadership DNA. So if I go into your organizations and I ask 20 people, what does leadership mean in this organization, the probability is I'll get 20 different answers. And for me in organizations, what I've been doing recently is talking about a leadership strategy. So a leadership strategy is not just about leadership development. It's about understanding what are the key leadership issues in the organization. Okay, if we move on to change, just perhaps some concepts. For me, I've been battling in my life to understand the difference between change and transformation. So, you know, the big consulting companies talk about change. Well, very often it's actually just project management. And so where's the difference? And for me, transformation is really at a much deeper kind of level. One of the paradoxes, I guess, is that the greater the need for change, the greater the need for stability. You can't have organizations just changing on an ongoing. Eventually you get change fatigue and people just lose the plot. Really, people resist change when it's forced upon them. I don't think in this day and age people resist change that often. They need time to process the change. Many organizations restructure themselves on an ongoing basis. I really do sometimes wonder why that is necessary, but nevertheless, they just keep restructuring. And perhaps some of the processes, you know, one should not just restructure the business. One needs to redesign the organization, which is quite a big difference. How do you create an organization that is change ready? And it's about connecting with the outside, that open systems thing, making sure that you understand and you connect it to all that is going on around the rest of the world. Of course, understanding there's no greater threat to an organization than success. Because if you're really successful, woe betide the person who holds up the red flag. Hotspots is where you get real innovation, people are connected. You know what it's like. It's like it works. And as I said, mental models are really a filter in terms of how leaders look into the future. And that was a quick summary of what is there.